guys, it's Erin, and after I fix my glasses, I am going to tell you about my 2019 reading goals. So it is the last day of the year as this is being uploaded, at least that's my plan. We'll see what happens. And I have already kind of shared with you some of my, some of the specific books that I'm excited to read and my classics reading goals, but I have a couple of other broader goals that I just kind of wanted to sit and discuss with y'all for a couple of minutes and just share them with you. So these goals have kind of come about through reflecting on my 2018 reading and my better understanding of what at least the first semester, the spring semester of 2019 is going to be as far as schoolwork goes, and also just a little bit of a reflection on, or a little bit of reflection as a result of putting together my classics club list. I'm one of those people that I have great ideas or have personal goals for myself and I get really excited about them, and then I kind of full speed ahead, and then it doesn't happen in the next week or whatever, and then I get discouraged or I just kind of lose steam and it sort of fizzles a little bit. And that happens with my reading too, but I just never stop the full steam ahead part. But with my classics reading, for example, in 2017 I went and bought 15 books at the used bookstore that were classics, and I was going to read all of them that year, and then I didn't, and I felt like I had done a really horrible job with my classics reading, which is part of the reason that I made my 2018 classics reading goal. Except when I was looking back at the last two reading years, I read almost 30 classics that in 2017, that year that I feel like I failed. I just didn't read the ones that I had purchased. I read other ones. And that's kind of, that happens when you're buying books, you know, you buy, especially, and I've started to do this with classics a little bit more, where I'll buy a classic knowing that I'll want to read it eventually, but I don't mind it sitting on my shelf for a year or two now. So that's kind of the direction that I'm heading, and putting the classics club list together was great because I was able to kind of collect a list of all of the classics that I really want to read soon, and then realize that if I read 10 of them a year, which is a third of what I read last year, for example, then I can, you know, in 5 years, I will have read a lot of the classics that I have kind of wished that I had already read. And that's not actually a long time in the grand scheme of things. So that kind of was the final drop in the decision to just kind of back off my reading pace a little bit and give myself some time. I don't have to read everything all the time, every month. I won't ever stop reading, but especially because the spring semester, I know I'm going to be doing so much reading and so much work because I did last semester, and I'll talk more about that in my 2018 wrap-up, which will be coming in a couple of days. So my first kind of broad reading goal is just to be okay with reading slower. I also would like to get to some long books that I just didn't tackle because I knew that during the school year they would take me several weeks or even a month or more to finish because my pace of reading has slowed down so much, and I want to be okay with that if I only read a new book on of personal reading in a month or two or something. And so that's kind of just my first goal, is to just slow down and not feel as much pressure to read a whole lot of books and focus on the quality of my reading and pick books that I know I'm going to enjoy. I already kind of started doing this naturally as my time for my personal reading shrunk, but I'd like to continue to do it more deliberately. So you saw in my 19 books that I'd like to get to in 2019, I may or may not get to all of those, but a lot of them were quite long, and I would really just like to give myself the permission and the space to take the time to read those books and not feel like I have to devour 15 novels in a month or something. Also, I have to read quickly and at high volume for school, so I just don't want to keep doing that in my personal reading also. I really even like the habit I have of having a bunch of different books going at the same time, like that did not work for me in the second half of the semester. I'm kind of spoiling my 2018 reflection video, but whatever. And like, so just pick a book, stick with it until I'm finished, and just like really savor and enjoy that time of reading what I want to read instead of what I have to read for school. That might shift a little bit, like over the summer I'll probably read more fluffy books because it's summertime, and I'm sure I'll hit a place in like July where my reading volume increases a lot, but then it'll go back down when the school starts again. Anyway, so to that end, I've set my Goodreads reading goal, or I will when I'm allowed to, on Goodreads for 75 books. Now this is still actually pretty high for some people. It's less than half of what I read in 2018, and it's only as high as it is because I count the full books that I read in school, and I know that in the spring semester I'm going to be reading a lot more complete works. So as a result, that's kind of based on my assumption that between 30 and 50 of the books that I read next year will be ones that I have to read for school, and then the other kind of 40 to 25 to 40 or whatever will be ones that I read myself. If once my reading lists for the spring semester come out, it looks like I'll actually be reading less than I'm anticipating, less complete works than I'm anticipating, I might drop the goal down to like 65 or 60. For my personal reading, what I'd like to do is just read, like aim for about 2 books a month. That would be like one whatever and then a classic, and that will probably not work out quite exactly, which is kind of, you know, because life happens. So at the moment my Goodreads reading goal is 75. I can shift it if I want to. I always kind of do a look in June or July and see whether, like, if I'm close to meeting it, I can just go ahead and raise it a little bit, and if I'm still like a long way off, I might adjust it. I would rather get to my reading goal early and then read more, and, you know, like set it at 60, for example, if I decide that I need to revise it down because of my reading. I'd rather revise it down to 60 and then end up reading 75 books than keep it at 75 and only read, you know, 69 books. I would feel annoyed about that. And then I just have kind of 2 other more broad goals. One is kind of a guideline more than a goal, I guess, and that is that I would like to read more adult fiction, and I would also like to read more adult, specifically literary fiction, adult fantasy, and adult historical fiction. I've been hesitant to pick up adult fiction for a long time because a lot of the books that I was seeing or even that were being recommended to me were like women's fiction or thrillers that are kind of like subgenres that I'm not really interested in, and so, or it was literary fiction that I had to read for school and didn't enjoy, and so I kind of brushed off all of the fiction, and I've just never really been in the habit of reading adult fantasy. I haven't read a ton of adult fantasy unless a particular book makes a splash and it kind of comes to my attention, like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell or something. But there are so many great adult fantasy books that have come out in like the last 10 years that I'm just starting to find out about. And then same thing with historical fiction. A lot of the historical fiction that I was coming across was sort of like romance set in the past, and that's just not my favorite genre, romance just generally. But I'm discovering that there are some people out there who are writing really interesting, more literary historical fiction that is more just like a story set in the past. That's not specifically a romance. And so that's another genre that I'd kind of like to explore. I don't know if it's very large, but I would like to get more familiar with the authors. I'm thinking of books like The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry, or The Mermaid and Mr. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gower, both of which are books that I read last year and really enjoyed. So that, adult fantasy, and then of course classics and literary fiction too. I'm discovering that there's kind of like a strain of lit fic that I've read and disliked, and I'm learning a little bit more about the authors that belong to that strain, and I can avoid them, and I'm finding more authors in the strain that I do like, which is just telling a good story beautifully. Really, I want a good story. So for example, I really like Cormac McCarthy as a writer, but like this year I read Haruki Murakami and I did not like that. But I read Kazuo Ishiguro also, and I enjoyed that one. I would try more of his work. So just like kind of feeling more comfortable exploring those areas, those fields, and reading those really interesting books. I don't want to say like, oh, I'm never going to read YA again or anything, because that's not true. Some of the books that I'm really looking forward to reading next year are young adult, but my young adult reading fell off a cliff once school started, and I just think that's really interesting. And so I don't necessarily want to try to read less young adult, but I certainly would like to read more adult fantasy and adult fiction, and just generally, and become more familiar with the writers in that field. I think I'm getting a little old for a young adult, and so there are a lot of great young adult novels that are kind of just good stories and are really available to anyone to read, but there's also a lot of young adult novels that are written for young adults, and I keep I keep getting further away from that age category. Again, kind of finding the authors that I know are doing really interesting things with stories and writing really good, just generally good stories, versus the writers that are doing really interesting things but for teenagers. So anyway, I'll talk more about that kind of from a reflective point of view in my next video, which, well, actually not my next video, but in some videos that come out in the next week when I talk about my 2018 wrap-up. Like, those are my two goals, really, is just to read less and be more deliberate about what I'm picking up, I guess. And I think that's pretty, I mean, that's a really broad and loose goal, but because I'm in schools now, I just like doing some kind of numeric goal or some kind of challenge for myself over the course of the year, just I think would be too much. And so I might pick something like that back up in 2020 when things calm down a little bit in my schedule, but I don't know. I just don't know. I'd love to hear if you have any goals for your reading in 2019, whether that's a specific goal or a numeric goal or a genre goal or just some kind of broad and vague goal like I just shared with you. Share them down in the comments. Maybe we can kind of like get some ideas from each other about the different things that we would like to do. Thanks so much for watching. Happy New Year, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.